Whether you've just picked up FoundryVTT and are ready to dive into the wonderful world of modules, or you're an old hand who's looking to refresh or revisit their module list as we move into 2026, this video is for you. We are counting down our 5 most essential modules here today on the Baileywiki channel. Hey everyone, this is Zephyr, and again, welcome to the Baileywiki channel, where we teach everyday DMs how to create truly amazing experiences for their players by combining art and technology. We also make modular systems and scenes for Foundry Virtual Tabletop that you can use without any setup, some of which will be the backdrop for today's video, where we are counting down those 5 essential must-have modules for Foundry. Now, before we dive in, we want to make sure we cover the criteria for these modules. All of these have to work for any type of game. Whether you're using a lot of battle maps or you're using a lot of theater of mind, it has to bring utility to you. Number 2, it has to work for any system or just about any system. It does us no good to be talking about D&D 5e modules if you're playing Pathfinder 2e. So all of these are system agnostic and will give you a lot of benefit. Third and finally, all of these modules have to be accessible. It's okay if they have high skill ceilings, but in order to get the lion's share of the quality of life, it needs to be really easy. With that criteria in mind, definitely let us know as you go through the video what you think about each of these modules and if there is another module that you think belongs on this list as well. It's important to note that as we go through the list, this is a showcase rather than a tutorial. Some of these are simple enough that you can install it and hit the ground running, and you don't need to really know much more about it. For the rest, we do have tutorials or showcases on them on our channel that will link in the description and on screen as we get to them. Now, with all of that said, let's go ahead and dive in. The very first module we're diving into is our honorable mention, Find the Culprit. It's an honorable mention because if you're not using very many modules, then you probably don't need this. But as a lot of people tend to do, once you start getting into modules in Foundry, you tend to collect a lot of them. Find the Culprit is the way to go through and find what module is causing any issues you're having, or if you have so many modules you can't remember what does what and you want to figure out what's responsible for what feature in your game. Essentially, the best way to do that normally is take all of your active modules, turn off half of them. Did that have your thing in it or not? If yes, then turn off another half of what you still have active, and then keep going down, cutting in half until you find the proper thing that's responsible for your issue. Find the Culprit basically automates that process to do as few steps as possible, and it has nice instructions that you can read through that's going to tell you everything, and nice icons that will let you know what everything means and how you're going through this. So with this, you by default have things locked, like these libraries. It's also how you can set your controls, like, okay, I know it's not this, this, or this, so what else could it be? And then when you hit start run, it will go through and automate this process. So here we have the pop-up screen that you get, and it tells you, does your issue persist, or does the feature you want persist? And you can either select yes, which means we're going to then keep drilling down, or we can hit no and be searching through the other half of our modules. And this will ultimately keep going through, and it's going to tell us, whether things are suspect or not, and it's going to help us go through and tell us how many steps we have left as well. So it gives you a good idea of just how long finding something's going to take. It can always take less than this amount of time if you happen to find it quickly. But it's a really great system for being able to go through and find any issues that you're experiencing. Again, Find the Culprit stays as an honorable mention just because you might not need it if you're not using that many modules. Now let's go ahead and dive into our list proper, and we're going to be starting with Monk's Scene Navigation. When first discussing Monk's Scene Navigation, we need to talk about navigation in Core Foundry. So over here is where our scene navigation area is, and this is showing me all the scenes that I have navigable, where they'll show up in this list. There is this icon indicating this slashed through eye, and that shows that I have the navigation on, but then it's for GM only. To make it all players, it disappears. I can click on any of these to go view them, My currently viewed scene is going to have this circle with a dot. If that is different from my active scene, then my active scene is going to have a star. And I can collapse this with the little collapse navigation window, and the active one will always still be there. If the active scene is what I'm viewing at, nothing else is going to show up here. Over in my sidebar, you'll notice that I have no special icons indicating what is navigable and what's not. And also the hash wastelands here are in a separate folder from my other scenes that I have navigable, but there's no distinction here, so it's not really showing me that. In addition, when it comes to navigating to scenes from your sidebar, if you left click on anything, you're going to have the configure options come up rather than going to the scene. You need to right click where you can hit view scene. You can also activate or toggle the navigation from here. And that's just a little more cumbersome than what I would like when it comes to navigating my scenes. So now let's take a look at what that experience is like with Monk Scene navigation. Now with Monk Scene navigation, you can see clearly there are these little compass icons indicating that the navigation has been toggled on for these scenes. And if I toggle it off, they disappear. You can also see that this scene is available for my players, indicated by this icon of a bunch of people. And you can see going into these other folders that I also only have the navigable scenes with those icons. And if we go over to the dropdown, we can see that these are actually differentiated into folders now for me. You may not like the folders, that's completely up to you, but we find it nice and helpful for being organized with all of these pieces. And perhaps most importantly, back in our scenes directory, if we left click, we now will navigate to the scene rather than configure it. But of course, we can still configure by right clicking and go to configure there. So with all of this, we think that Monk Scene navigation really makes the navigation experience a lot more intuitive here in Foundry. We like working out of our sidebar a lot, and being able to just left click to immediately go to a scene instead of having to right click, move our mouse, and then left click again just adds a little less friction when it comes to switching between scenes. And we prefer to use our sidebar rather than the navigation up top. And if we are using navigation, it's really nice to be able to see at a glance from the sidebar, what have I already added to my navigation, and what do I still need to, and what is available for my players and what's not. Our next module is Ownership Viewer, and this is a really useful tool for being able to verify what kind of permissions everyone has at any given point. So here we are in Core Foundry, and we can see, if I open up my party here, I have set up these characters, and if I configure ownership, I can see that Angus, the player, is set up as the owner for Angus, the character, and everyone else is using the default permissions, and then those are set to none. I can see the same kind of pattern with Gomer, where the player named Gomer has permissions and no one else does. I've set those up individually. I want to make everyone an observer for all of these other character sheets so people can see at least a little bit of information about them, but not necessarily all the details or make alterations. So if I configure my folder, I can make all players into observers, which is great. It then propagates down. And we can see that Angus is the owner and all players are now observer. So that's fantastic. But these folder operations are useful when you're first setting stuff up. But if you're doing any kind of active maintenance, it can be really easy for things to slip through the cracks. So like say I had this other character that I realized I didn't have in here correctly, Aoth. And now if I go to configure my ownership, we can see that all players, it's none. And there are these defaults because making those changes to that folder only propagates to what's inside of the folder at the time. So it makes it super easy to accidentally miss something. And that's where Ownership Viewer comes in. Now I'm back with Ownership Viewer, and we're going to go through that same process we just kind of looked at. So here, if I open up Party, you'll notice we have these little dots next to all of these actors. And if we hover over it, it will show us that Angus is the owner. So it will tell us what these dots mean, and they are signifying the permissions for that particular item or entry. And if we configure the ownership for this folder and we make it observer, we can see that there's this kind of rainbow colored square that is showing that everyone is an observer. Otherwise, these symbols are going to be specific to the particular player. It's going to match the color that they have specified. This makes it super easy that when I drag Aoth in here, I can see that there is no permissions for them. And Ownership Viewer also has this nice feature that's got kind of the share icon you can click on, and it's a shortcut directly to the ownership configuration. So you can make all of the players observer right there. And these also still function as these ownership configurations whenever you click on them, even when they are displaying these little icons. Ownership Viewer also extends to just about every kind of entity here. So in my items, this is really helpful for seeing, okay, all of these simple melees, all of my players are able to see so they can drag them onto their sheets if we're doing kind of a shopping session or something like that. But then in this particular setting, I don't have muskets or pistols available to them, or they're only in very specific locations, so I don't have those available on the observer. And I can also see that I don't have any of these magical weapons available to them. So it's really easy to see at a glance that they can't see anything that they're not supposed to, but they are able to see everything that they need to. Similarly, if we go over into journals, I can see my GM notes are all going to be no player permissions, but then my player notes, I have the party journal where everyone is set as an owner. And this also extends to the individual pages. You can see there's this special triangle symbol for inherit on the journals. So this means that that particular page is going to have whatever permissions the overall journal has, but then you can configure the permissions on the specific pages. So this is where this really shines. So for example, we have Ventress's journal. As we could see, Ventress is the owner, and then there are no other permissions. So it allows us to use one journal entry with multiple journal pages and have those permissions set up. That is a feature in Core Foundry, but this makes it really easy to see and visualize who has what permissions and who can control what, especially if you're doing more complex journals with specific permissions on different pages. All of this just makes it way easier to tell at a glance, is everything configured? Can people see things? I can't tell you how many times I've had a session as a GM where I didn't have Ownership Viewer installed, and I said, okay, everyone, you should be able to open up your journal to this page, or you should be able to open up this note that you've uncovered from this battle or from this location, and you should be able to read that in the journal section. And my players are like, what are you talking about? Ownership Viewer helps make that a thing of the past, because you're always able to see like, oh, yep, I did not actually have the observer permissions or the owner permissions I needed for my players to see that. And I can know that immediately at a glance and fix those permission problems. Returning to the list yet again is dice tray. As you may know, you can type /R or /roll and then a dice formula in order to roll a die in Foundry. And of course that integrates with Dice So Nice, etc. But dice tray adds a really great option for being able to just click on these icons down here. And you can also right click to remove them and add all kinds of different pieces, as well as some customizations like a roll for stats option or any kind of specific formula that you may have in mind. And you can create these rolls very quickly and very easily. So this is super great for really rules light systems where you're not really needing to use the character sheet that much. It's just roll this kind of die, or where you're doing really quick little ad hoc bits. So here, rolling 2d20, or if I want to have a advantage or keep highest or keep lowest, then I have those buttons here. And it's all just very easy to really quickly roll dice, much faster than typing out the dice commands. And if you're not using token HUDs or things like that, you can then roll these other checks super easily with the dice tray integration. And again, it's super customizable. You can change all of these colors like I've done here and add additional buttons like a feature to roll for stats using your favorite stat generation method, etc. It's incredibly flexible and nice quality of life for any kind of ad hoc dice rolling. I've turned off my cursor highlighter here for this next module, which is pointer and pings. Now, Core Foundry has this option where you can see the mouse position of other players in the game, as well as their name on top of a dot that matches their style. You can also long click to do a ping, or Alt and long click to have a kind of warning ping, and Shift long click to then have this little arrow that will then pan the players' screens, though not the GM's. Pointer and pings expands on this a little bit by having a hotkey where you can use a specific image here to draw things out for people. And it's a lot more visible than, say, using just the little dot when you're trying to show things around. So with pointer and pings, if you hold down your hotkey, which is by default X, you can really gesture for things to say like, hey, Ventress, you should go pick the lock on that door or check that door for traps. And you can then just do a single left click to have a fairly persistent ping, which is configurable, so you can change the duration on that, or a right click ping to then pan to that particular location. It's super customizable. You can change the look of your pointer or your ping really easily, and all of your players can do that individually as well. So it's super flexible, and it just makes communicating at the table so much easier when you have these really big visible gestures that aren't too obtrusive because they're not on all of the time. Topping out our list is Baileywiki Mass Edit. This module does a lot, and it answers a ton of our different wants and needs when it comes to working with Foundry. The first thing that you might notice is that the select tool, which is common in a lot of the different tools over here, is actually now present in every tool, including measured templates and lights, and perhaps most importantly, region controls, which allows us to move the different shapes that make up regions without having to delete them or redraw them. So super helpful when using regions or needing to move several lights at once. The next thing that's really helpful about it is being able to modify a lot of different aspects of something quickly without overwriting things. So with this, if I want to change these lights right here, and I want to adjust, say, their brightness, I can do that, and it's applied to all of these exactly the same. And there's also a really powerful search feature that lets me go through and find everything that has whatever aspect I'm looking for. So I could search by color, I could search by the light radius. I can also cross-reference that by making sure I have multiple things. For example, everything that has the torch animation and this light radius I will find. I can search it up and I can make changes to all of them, giving them a different radius and maybe a different animation, and apply those throughout the entire scene without having to go search for it. So it's a really potent way to modify your scenes, and you can also go through and search without having anything selected, including being able to go through scenes themselves to change things like lighting, the token vision, etc. So it's an incredibly powerful tool just on those bare pieces of quality of life that it adds. There's also all kinds of other features, such as linked together objects that allow you to move entire buildings, similar to how Token Attacher works, but this is all within Mass Edit. And then browsers for having presets for different things. For example, we can go through and we can use presets for lights that we have available and place those. There's also really nice bits of preview involved there as well. So we're able to go through and look at, say, a house. And we get a nice preview that we can use mouse controls to edit, essentially. And when we're happy with it, then we can place it, or we can use another mouse key to cancel that. And this supports all kinds of different search features. For example, we have the house, but we also can have more complex searches. And now we can do saved searches like this Elvish and Orcish chairs. You can see we're looking for chair and then this complex bit of Elvish or Orcish, which gives us these different chairs in the Baileywiki library here. Now this works for any kind of assets that you have loaded in here from other content creators or things that you create yourself. So it's really nice for having these complex modular pieces at your fingertips. Kind of the predecessor and extension of these save searches are category browsers, which we have registered to these menus over here. But these basically give you all of these different categories that have specific search criteria built into them that you can use to look through and see things visually and easily. And you can, of course, then use those search functions here as well. And this also extends to scenes, so you can set these up as well if you want to have a really nice big library of those searches built into this nice visual package of the category browser. Just scratching the surface, and like we said, the quality of life features of the select tool and being able to edit and search for things are more than enough reason for us to always use mass edit. And then you have these other features that are just kind of the icing on top. And that does it for our 5 must-have Foundry modules for 2026. As we said, we can't really live without these, and we use them in just about any game with just about any system, and they give us a ton of great quality of life. But let us know in the comments what you think about all these different modules. Do you use these? Do you have alternatives to them that you like? And do you think there are any additions that you would like to see to the list? Also, let us know what you would like us to cover next. As we're going into 2026, now is a great time to sit down and go through your module list and figure out what you no longer need and what you want to add in to your module loadouts. So if you want us to count down another style of module like visual effects or similar, let us know and we'll be sure to cover that soon. Once again, this has been Zephyr with the Baileywiki channel. If you enjoyed this video, then subscribe to keep up with all of our latest content and consider becoming a patron. Not only do you support the channel, but you also gain access to all of the modular systems and scenes that we've made for FoundryVTT. Again, it's been Zephyr, and I want to thank you so much for watching. Happy gaming, and have a good one.